The girl was on her knees in the dry dirt, breathing hard, her face streaked with ash and dried blood. An iron chain wrapped around her wrists, the metal cold and stained, the padlock old but strong enough to treat her like livestock. The trader who brought her stood nearby, laughing through cracked lips that smelled like whiskey and dust. "She comes with the cow," he said, like she was no more than a broken tool thrown in for free. The sun beat down over the Dakota plains, burning everything it touched. To the men watching, she wasn't a woman, she was payment. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Daniel Carter, a rancher in his early 50s, stood by his horse in silence. He had seen bad things in his life, enough to know cruelty when it stood in front of him, but this was different. The girl couldn't have been more than 22. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, her knees scraped raw. When the trader shoved the reins toward him, Daniel hesitated. The cow was sick, cheap, barely worth the silver in his pocket. But the look in her eyes, tired, hollow, yet still holding something like defiance, made his hand move before his mind agreed. He counted out a few silver coins and dropped them into the trader's filthy palm. The coins clinked loudly, sealing a deal he already regretted. As he stepped forward, the girl flinched so hard the chain rattled against the ground. Daniel crouched, pulled the small brass key from the trader's belt, and asked quietly, "Why is she chained?" The trader spat into the dirt. "She bites," he said, grinning. Daniel said nothing. He slid the key into the lock, turning it slowly until the rust gave way with a soft click. The chain loosened. He looked at her eyes and said, voice low and steady, "I bought the cow, not you. You can go." The words hung in the air like something sacred. The chain slid from her wrists, but she didn't move. Her skin was bleeding where the iron had rubbed raw. Daniel reached for his coat to cover her shoulders, but she jerked back, breath shaking. Her voice came out broken, barely more than a whisper. "You've already paid, just finish it." Everything went still. Even the wind stopped. Daniel froze, coat in his hand, shame twisting in his chest. He swallowed hard. "I didn't buy you," he said quietly. She stared at the ground, like she was waiting for a blow. Daniel gently placed his coat over her shoulders anyway, stood, and walked toward the tree line with the cow. After a few seconds, she followed, barefoot, the broken chain still hanging from one wrist. They walked in silence until the forest swallowed the noise of the plains. The light through the pines turned softer, calmer. She looked back only once at the trader growing smaller in the distance. There was fear in her eyes, but also confusion. Why would a man pay silver only to let her go? And what kind of world did that make sense in? By the time they reached Daniel's cabin near the creek, the sky had started to dim. She sat by the fire, wrapped in his coat, silent, her fingers tracing the broken links still attached to her wrist. Daniel didn't ask questions. He made coffee, cooked a little stew, left a plate by her side. She didn't speak, not when he told her she was safe, not even when he turned away to give her space. Morning came quiet. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the creek murmured softly nearby. She was still awake, sitting where he left her, eyes red from not sleeping. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin. "What happens now?" Daniel poured 2 tin cups of coffee and sat across from her. "Now you eat," he said simply, "and then you decide, stay or go." She blinked, almost confused. "No one ever gave me a choice before." He nodded once. "Then maybe it's about time someone did." She didn't smile, but something in her eyes, something small, fragile, began to change. The girl, she still hadn't said her name, stayed quiet most of that morning. Daniel tried not to look at her too often. He didn't want to scare her more than she already was. She held the tin cup in both hands, warming her fingers around it, even though the coffee had gone cold. Her shoulders were small under his coat, like she was trying to disappear inside it. Every now and then, she glanced at the door, like someone might walk in and drag her away. Daniel stepped outside to chop wood, giving her space. The sun was barely above the trees when he heard the cabin door creak. She stood on the porch, one hand still holding the chain around her wrist, like she didn't know how to exist without it. Her voice was soft. Can I help?" He paused mid-swing, surprised. "Only if you want to," he said. She hesitated, then stepped barefoot into the dew-soaked grass. The ground was cold, but she didn't complain. He handed her small pieces of firewood to stack. Her movements were careful, like someone who'd been punished before for doing things wrong. Once, the log slipped from her hands and thudded to the ground. She froze, breath catching as if she expected him to yell, or worse. But Daniel just picked it up, handed it back, and said, "No harm done." That simple kindness seemed to confuse her more than cruelty ever could. Around midday, she finally asked, "Why did you help me?" He wiped sweat from his forehead, leaning on the axe. "Because it was the right thing." She looked at him like she didn't believe such things existed in real life. Her lips parted slightly, but she said nothing more. Not then. Later, he noticed her staring at the creek, her reflection broken by the water's movement. He could see her fighting something inside. Fear, maybe guilt, maybe the strange weight of being free. He walked over slowly so he wouldn't startle her. "Water's cold," he said, kneeling to wash his hands. She nodded, though he wasn't sure if she really heard him. She touched her wrist where the iron had bitten deep. The skin was torn and swollen. Daniel stood and went back to the cabin, returning with a clean cloth and a small bottle of salve. When he reached for her arm, she pulled back on instinct. He stopped, hands open. "I'm just trying to help," he said softly. Her breathing was uneven, but after a moment, she nodded and let him wrap the cloth around her wrist. She didn't cry, but her eyes shone in the firelight. "You got a name?" he asked quietly. She hesitated. Her voice came out rough, like the word didn't want to leave her mouth. "Emily." He nodded. "I'm Daniel." They didn't say much after that. Words weren't needed. The small cabin felt less like a shelter and more like a place where silence could breathe without fear. That night, rain tapped gently on the roof. Emily lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling. Daniel sat by the fire, pretending to read a worn-out book, but he wasn't really reading. He was listening to her breathing, to the storm, to the quiet questions neither of them had the courage to speak. When she finally whispered, "Do you think they'll come looking for me?" Daniel didn't lie. He stared into the flickering flames and said, "Maybe." Her voice wavered. "And if they do?" He looked at her then, really looked. "Then we deal with it. One step at a time." She watched him for a long moment, as if trying to figure out why a stranger would promise something like that. Maybe she didn't trust him yet. Maybe she didn't trust anyone. But that night, for the first time in a long time, she closed her eyes and slept. The rain that night softened the land, but by morning the clouds had cleared, leaving the world damp and quiet. Emily stood by the doorway, Daniel's coat still wrapped around her. She watched the hills like they were holding their breath. Daniel was saddling his horse when he noticed her staring. "You don't have to be afraid every second," he said calmly. She didn't look at him. People only say that when they don't know what it's like to be hunted. Daniel paused. "I know what it's like to lose sleep waiting for footsteps in the dark." She turned to him for the first time, eyes tired. "But you don't know what it's like when those footsteps are meant for you." He didn't argue. He simply said, "Then I'll stand between you and them." Her jaw tightened, like she wanted to believe him but didn't dare. "Why? You don't even know me." Daniel cinched the saddle strap and looked at her steadily. "I don't need to know you don't deserve chains." Silence stretched, heavy but honest. Inside the cabin, Emily helped set the table. Her hand still trembled sometimes, but less than before. Daniel poured coffee into 2 tin cups. She watched the steam rise before speaking. "What if they come back? The men who sold me." Daniel sat across from her, voice low and sharp. "Then they'll learn I don't give back what I saved." Her breath caught. "You can't protect me forever." He looked her straight in the eyes. "Maybe not forever, but today? Yeah, today I can try." For a while, only the fire cracked softly. Emily finally whispered, "I never asked you to save me." Daniel leaned forward. "And I never asked for thanks. But I'll be damned if I watch the world break another person just because it's easy." That was the moment something shifted between them. Not romance, not yet. Just a quiet understanding that kindness can be a stronger weapon than any gun. Later that afternoon, Daniel brought her an old pair of worn boots. "These should fit," he said. She blinked in surprise. "Why are you doing all this?" His answer was simple. Because someone should have done it sooner. Emily stared at the boots like they were something sacred. Back there, she said quietly. When I told you to just finish it, I meant it. I thought death was the only mercy left. Daniel's voice softened. But you're still here. I don't know how to be free, she whispered. You don't have to know, he replied. You just have to start. Evening came with a golden sky stretching over the pines. Emily swept the porch, slow but steady. Daniel sat on the steps, whittling a piece of wood. After a long silence, she asked, What if I'm the reason you get hurt? He didn't look up. Then at least I'll know I got hurt for something that mattered. The screen door creaked behind them as the wind picked up. Emily wrapped his coat tighter around her. She stared at him with something close to disbelief. You really won't give me back? Daniel finally met her eyes. His voice was firm, unshaking. They could bring guns, papers, or God himself. I'm not giving you to anyone. This time, she didn't look away. And for the first time since he found her in the dirt, she whispered, Thank you. Not out of fear, not out of obligation, but because she meant it. That night, neither of them said much. They didn't need to. Somewhere in the quiet, trust took its first breath. The next day started quietly, but the stillness didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the pause before a storm. Emily helped Daniel feed the chickens, her movements slow but steadier than before. She no longer flinched every time he stepped near her. The chain around her wrist was gone now. Daniel had carefully cut it off with a chisel and hammer the night before. The skin beneath was bruised, purple, and red, but it was healing. She watched the sunrise stretch across the fields. It's strange, she said softly. What is? Daniel asked, wiping his hands on his jeans. Waking up and not being afraid right away. He nodded. Takes a while to believe you're safe. Even when you are. She hesitated, then said, What if safety is just the quiet before they come back? Daniel didn't sugarcoat it. Maybe it is, but we don't run from shadows. Her eyes stayed on the horizon. I don't want anyone dying because of me. Daniel leaned against the fence. Emily, listen to me. His voice was steady, firm. You're not a burden. You're not something that happened to me. You're someone I chose to help. She swallowed, looking unsure how to accept that. By afternoon, the sky had turned warm and hazy. Emily was sweeping the porch when she asked, almost too quietly, Do you ever regret it? Regret what? Taking me. Daniel looked up from fixing a saddle strap. Only thing I regret is not getting there sooner. Emily didn't speak, but her eyes softened. That evening, they shared dinner, bread, beans, and coffee. The fire crackled inside the cabin. Daniel leaned back in his chair, tired from the day's work. Emily sat across from him, turning the tin cup in her hands. Can I ask you something? She said. Go ahead. What kind of man helps someone like me, knowing what trouble it brings? Daniel stared at the fire for a moment before answering. The kind of man who's seen too many people walk away when they shouldn't. She breathed in slowly. I don't know how to repay you. You don't owe me anything, he said. She looked up, and for the first time, there was a hint of fire behind her fear. You're wrong. The world owes men like you more than it ever pays. A quiet knocked on the walls of the cabin as the wind grew colder. Daniel was about to speak again when Emily suddenly said, My name isn't just Emily. He went still. She looked down at her hands. It's Emily Hart Whitlock. Daniel felt the name hit like a stone in his chest. He'd heard it, railroad money, bank money, people who own land they never walked on. He didn't say anything yet. She kept speaking, voice trembling but steady. My father owns Whitlock and Company Bank. They wanted me to marry a man twice my age to merge rail lines. I said no, so they locked me in my room until the wedding day. She gave a weak, humorless laugh. Funny thing about rich houses, they're just prettier prisons. Daniel set his cup down. You don't have to tell me more. She looked at him, tears filling her eyes but not falling. I do, because you should know what you're risking. Boone didn't just chain me for money. He did it because someone paid him to make me disappear. The air felt colder. Daniel's jaw tightened. And now, she whispered, they'll come, and they won't be asking nicely this time. Daniel stared into the fire, the shadows dancing across his face. His voice was calm, but there was iron in it. Then let them come. Emily's eyes widened. You don't understand. These men don't care about laws or God. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low. I don't care who they are. No one touches you while you're under my roof. Her lips trembled. Why are you doing this? He held her gaze. Because someone should have done it long before me. Emily didn't answer. Instead, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and whispered, like a promise to herself, then I won't run anymore. And for the first time, she didn't look like a prisoner. She looked like someone learning how to stand again. The next morning felt different. Not louder, not darker, just heavier. Like the land itself knew something was coming. Daniel saddled the horse, while Emily stood by the fence, her fingers lightly brushing the scars on her wrist. She didn't wear the broken chain anymore, but sometimes she touched that spot like her body still remembered the weight. Town's a few miles out, Daniel said, adjusting the saddle straps. We'll get supplies. Maybe talk to the preacher, maybe the sheriff. Emily didn't move. What if someone recognizes me? Daniel met her eyes. Then I stand between you and them. Same as before. She hesitated. And if I don't stop, then they'll learn I don't stop either. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried something stronger than anger, conviction. They rode side by side through the winding dirt trail, hooves soft against the earth still damp from rain. Emily kept her head down, hat low, hands gripping the reins tighter than needed. Daniel noticed. You don't have to be scared every minute, he said gently. She gave a small, tired laugh. I don't know how not to be. They passed a telegraph pole near a split in the road. A paper nailed to it flapped in the breeze. Daniel slowed the horse. Emily didn't want to look, but her eyes were pulled to it anyway. A wanted poster. Her name was printed in bold. Emily Hart Whitlock. Wanted for theft and kidnapping. Reward, $500. Her breath hitched. They're calling me a criminal. Daniel tore the poster down and folded it without a word. They'll say anything if it fits their story. Emily swallowed. Maybe I should turn myself in. End this. Daniel turned in the saddle, voice low but sharp. You think they want justice? They want silence. You go back. You disappear for good. Her hands trembled on the reins. So what do? We keep moving forward. We don't hide. We don't beg. We fight the right way. She stared at him like she wanted to believe it. By the time they reached town, the sun was sliding low in the sky. Deadwood was alive with noise. Horses, voices, music from the saloon spilling into the street. Emily pulled her hat lower. Daniel rode steady, eyes scanning everything. They stopped near the small church at the edge of town. Daniel dismounted first, then helped Emily down. She hesitated, boots touching the dirt. He spoke quietly. We can go to the sheriff. Tell him everything. Or we can keep riding. Your choice. Emily looked at the church bell, swinging gently in the evening wind. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I don't want to be found. I just want to live. Daniel nodded once. Then we do this our way. They stayed in the quiet of the churchyard for a while. Emily's hands were twisting the hem of her sleeve. If I stay, if I live like this, people will come after you. Daniel gave a tired smile. Let him. I've lived alone a long time. Doesn't bother me much to have something worth fighting for. Emily stared at him, eyes glassy but determined. I don't deserve this kind of kindness. Doesn't matter what you think you deserve, Daniel said. You're getting it anyway. Silence again. But this time, it didn't feel empty. That night, back at the cabin, the firelight flickered across Daniel's face as he set his rifle by the door. Emily sat nearby, knees pulled to her chest. Daniel, she said softly. He looked up. If I asked you to let me go tomorrow, would you? His expression didn't change. If you wanted to leave, I'd put you on a horse myself. But if you're asking if I'd stop caring what happens to you, no. Not now. Not ever. Her voice cracked. Why? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Because someone has to prove the world isn't all bad. Might as well be me. Emily didn't answer. Instead, she wiped her eyes and whispered, Then I'll stay, but only if you promise something. What's that? If they come for me, don't die because of me. Daniel's eyes held hers. No promises, he said softly. But I'll try damn hard to live. She didn't smile, not fully. But for the first time, her shoulders relaxed just a little. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like a warning. Somewhere far off, a horse cried in the distance. The storm hadn't arrived yet. but it was close. The days that followed felt calm on the surface, but the calm was thin, like ice over deep water. Emily moved through the cabin with quiet purpose. She swept the porch, fed the chickens, boiled coffee in the mornings. She didn't smile much, but the way she stood was different now. Less like someone waiting to be struck, more like someone learning how to breathe again. Daniel noticed it too. One morning, as she poured water into the basin, he said, "You're getting steadier." She didn't look at him. "We're just better at pretending." Daniel leaned against the table. "You don't have to pretend anything here." Her voice was soft but honest. "I don't know who I am without fear." He nodded. "Then we'll figure it out together." Just when peace started to feel real, the world reminded them it wasn't finished. It began with the sound of hooves, slow, steady, deliberate. Daniel was fixing the fence when he heard it. Emily was on the porch, hands stilling mid-motion. 3 riders appeared over the ridge, coats dark, horses restless. They had the look of men who didn't travel for talk. Emily went pale instantly. Her hand moved to her wrist, the memory of the chain still living in her skin. Daniel stepped forward, rifle resting against his shoulder, but not raised. The riders stopped at the gate. The man in the middle slid off his horse, boots hitting the ground with purpose. He spat into the dirt and smirked. "Morning, Carter," he said. His voice was oily, practiced. "Fine land you got here." "Not for sale," Daniel replied. The man chuckled. "We ain't here for dirt." His eyes shifted to Emily. "We're here for the girl." Emily froze. Daniel's grip on the rifle tightened. "She's not yours to take." The man's grin widened. "Boone says she ran off, owing him money. Says you're hiding stolen property." Emily stepped down from the porch, voice shaking. "He's lying. I don't owe him a thing." One of the riders sneered. "You sure about that, Miss Whitlock?" Daniel's eyes flicked to Emily, but she didn't deny it this time. She stood there, silent, chest rising and falling too fast. The lead rider's smile dropped. "Last chance, rancher." "Step aside." Daniel lifted the rifle, but angled it just above the man's hat. He fired. The bullet tore through the brim cleanly. The rider flinched, eyes wide with fury. Daniel's voice was calm. "Next one doesn't miss." Silence stretched. Even the horses shifted nervously. The rider adjusted what remained of his hat, anger simmering in his gaze. "You think this ends here?" "No," Daniel said simply. "I think it starts here." The men backed their horses. The leader pointed a finger at Emily. "You can't hide forever. They'll come with papers, with law, with more guns than you can count." Emily's voice was quiet but clear. "Let them." He glared once more, then turned his horse. The 3 of them rode off, dust rising behind them like smoke. Emily stood still long after they disappeared. Her hands trembled, but her expression wasn't just fear now. It was something sharper. Shame, anger, resolve. Daniel lowered his rifle. "You all right?" She didn't answer at first. Then, she whispered, "They're not stopping. Even if I run." Daniel nodded. "So we don't run." Her eyes met his. "Then what do we do?" "We stand," he said, "and we make sure they don't break you again." Emily's voice cracked. "I'm scared." Daniel stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough she could feel he wasn't going anywhere. "Being scared doesn't make you weak. Staying scared does." She looked at him for a long time, like she was trying to find any sign of doubt in his face. But there wasn't any. Finally, she whispered, "Then I'll stand too." That night, the cabin was quiet, but sleep didn't come easily. Emily sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Daniel sat beside her, rifle across his knees. She spoke suddenly. "If they come for me again, and you get killed because of it, I'll never forgive myself." Daniel didn't look away from the fire. "If they come, and I do nothing, I'll never forgive myself either." Emily turned to him, tears glimmering but not falling. "Why does your kindness hurt more than their cruelty?" Daniel's voice was soft. "Because kindness asks you to believe you're worth saving." She didn't speak again. But that night, for the first time, she reached out, her hand resting lightly beside his on the floorboards. Not touching, just close. And somehow that was enough. The days after the riders left were quiet, but it wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that came before thunder. Emily helped with chores, learned how to saddle a horse, even laughed once when the old cow sneezed hay onto her dress. But every evening, her eyes still drifted to the tree line, waiting, listening. Daniel noticed. One night, as they cleaned up after supper, he said, "You're somewhere else again." She paused, hand still in the dishwater. "I keep thinking when they come back they won't knock. They'll burn their way through that door." Daniel leaned on the counter, voice steady. "If they do, they'll find me on the other side of it." She turned to him. "Why do you always make it sound simple?" "Because fear makes things bigger than they are. Standing makes them smaller." She shook her head. "You talk like a man who isn't afraid of anything." Daniel looked at her then. "I'm afraid every day. I just don't let it decide what I do." Those words stuck in her chest long after. By the third morning after the warning, the air felt heavier. Clouds gathered over the hills. Emily stood by the window with a wanted poster Daniel had taken down folded in her hands. She stared at her own name printed in bold black ink. "Emily Hart Whitlock," she whispered. "A crime to exist." Daniel walked in silently, took the paper from her hands, and fed it to the fire. It curled into ash. "Let them print 1,000 more," he said. "Paper can't decide who you are." She watched it burn. "Then who am I now?" He looked at her with an honesty that hurt. Someone who survived. Someone who's still here. That night, rain started again. Heavy this time. The roof drummed with it. Emily sat by the fire. Daniel cleaned his rifle slowly, methodically. She broke the silence first. "I don't want to hide anymore." Daniel didn't look up. "Then don't. I'm tired of being hunted. I want this to end, really end." He finally met her eyes. "That means fighting smart. Not just fighting." Emily nodded. "Teach me." Daniel paused. "Teach you what?" "To survive without you in front of me." He set the rifle down. His voice was quiet. "You think I'm always going to be here?" Her eyes softened. "I think you won't leave. But I also know men die." Daniel took a slow breath. "All right, I'll teach you." She swallowed. "Even if it means one day I might have to stand alone. Especially then." The next morning didn't feel like any other. The sky was pale gray. The wind carried a warning. Daniel handed her a small revolver. It was old but well kept. Emily stared at it. "What if I freeze?" Daniel answered. "Then you breathe. Then you pull the trigger anyway." Her hands shook as she aimed at a bottle he'd placed on a fence post. She fired, missed badly. The recoil jolted her wrist. Daniel stood behind her, steadying her arms gently. Again, she shot, missed. Again. By the sixth shot, glass shattered. She lowered the gun, chest heaving. I did it." Daniel's mouth tugged into the smallest smile. "You didn't run." Emily looked at the broken glass, glinting in the dirt. "Feels like I killed something." "You did," Daniel said softly. "You killed the part that thought you couldn't fight back." That evening, as they sat on the porch, thunder rolled far in the distance. Emily spoke without looking at him. "If they come tomorrow, and you're not fast enough, what then?" Daniel's voice was steady. "Then you run. Then you live." Emily turned to him, eyes fierce. "I won't leave you behind." He held her gaze. "This isn't about me, Emily. This is about you not dying in someone else's cage." She blinked hard, breath shaking. "What if I can't do it?" Daniel leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then remember this. Fear doesn't make you weak. Giving up does." She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out this time, her fingers brushing over his hand. And he didn't pull away. The wind rose, carrying the scent of storm and gunpowder. The fight wasn't here yet, but it was close. The storm came before dawn. Lightning flickered behind the hills as thunder rolled over the land. Daniel was already awake, boots on, rifle loaded. Emily stood by the window, hair messy, heart pounding. She didn't need to say a word. He already knew. They heard the horses first, then voices, and the crunch of boots on wet ground. Emily's breath shook, but she didn't back away this time. Daniel glanced at her. "Remember, breathe. Don't run unless I say." She nodded, though her hands trembled. 3 riders stepped into the clearing, different men this time. One wore a sheriff's badge. The one in front held a paper, rain soaking the ink. His expression was cold. "Daniel Carter," he said, "you're harboring a fugitive. Emily Hart Whitlock. Step aside." Daniel didn't move. "She's not a criminal." The sheriff unfolded the paper. Kidnapping, theft, interference with legal guardians. Emily stepped forward before Daniel could stop her. Her voice shook, but the words came strong. I was the one kidnapped. I was the one chained. The sheriff's eyes flicked to her, then to Daniel. Doesn't matter. Orders are orders. Daniel lifted his rifle slightly. Some orders don't deserve to be followed. Tension thickened. The men reached for their guns. Then a gunshot cracked the air, but it didn't come from Daniel. It came from Emily. Her hands were steady now. The bullet hit the dirt just inches from Sheriff's boot. Steam rose from the rain-soaked ground. Her voice was low but clear. I'm done being dragged like property. You want me? Then tell my father to come himself. Tell him to look me in the eye. The sheriff hesitated. Something in her eyes made even the hardened men pause. After a long silence, he lowered his gun. This isn't over. Daniel stepped forward. Maybe not, but today is. The riders backed away. The storm swallowed them as they disappeared into the trees. Emily stood still, breathing heavy. The revolver slipped from her fingers, landing softly in the mud. Daniel walked to her slowly. You did good, he said quietly. Her voice cracked. I was shaking. He nodded. Courage isn't about shaking or not. It's about standing anyway. She looked at him, really looked like she finally believed she wasn't alone. Her shoulders lowered. She cried, but it wasn't the broken kind of crying. It was the kind that washed something away. Days passed. The storm left the land fresher, softer. No one came for her again. The world stayed quiet but not empty. Emily learned how to mend fences, ride better, laugh louder. She still woke some nights from old memories, but Daniel would sit beside her until the fear passed. Not with promises, but with presence. One evening, by the river where the water shimmered gold, she spoke softly. Do you ever wish you just walked away when you saw me chained? Daniel smiled tiredly. Every time I try to imagine it, I can't. Emily looked at the sky. I used to think I was broken. You weren't, Daniel said. You were just waiting for someone to treat you like you weren't. She smiled, a small one but real. What if one day the world comes again to take everything? Daniel skimmed a stone over the water. Then we start again, because that's what living is, choosing to keep building, even when you've watched things fall. Emily was quiet for a long moment. Her voice came gentle. Maybe that's the lesson, isn't it? Daniel glanced at her. What is? That broken people don't need rescuing. They need someone who doesn't run when things get messy. He nodded. And maybe the world doesn't change by fighting monsters. Maybe it changes by refusing to become one. She let the river wind carry the silence for them as the sun dipped low. And for the first time since the chains, life didn't feel borrowed. It felt like it finally belonged to her.